Welcome back to my Bond series. We've reached the 6th entry in the actual movie series, the 6th entry in this review series leading up to No Time to Die in April, and we are talking about the 6th movie on Her Majesty's Secret Service. On Her Majesty's Secret Service finds Bond investigating Blofeld in the Swiss Alps. Blofeld has brought some of the most beautiful women from across the world to the Swiss Alps that he calls his angels of death and plans to contaminate the world's food supply by poisoning livestock and crops. Let's just say I don't understand when people say that this is one of the best Bond movies. This is one of my lesser Bond films. This is the one to this point in the series where I'm just like, this is not good at all. Just wait until I talk about the next one, Diamonds Are Forever, because that one is even worse. So for those of you that don't know, if you watched my Only Live Twice review, you will remember me saying that Sean Connery was a bit disenchanted in that movie and that it seemed like he didn't want to play the role of Bond anymore. He resigned from the role during filming of the movie. He stated, "This is my last time playing Bond," because he didn't like doing all the publicity. He didn't want to be typecast. He wanted to actually live a normal life. Completely understand the dude. So Bond was recast in this movie after an extensive search, and the producers landed on George Lazenby. Well, I think everything that you know about George Lazenby has been said. This dude, when he was hired, signed a 7-picture deal to play James Bond. A, I'm glad that didn't happen. B, he only starred in Bond for one movie. You want to know why? Because of his inexperience, he felt as if he was being bossed around a lot on set, and he didn't really know what kind of fame would come from being in a big movie like this, because he had never acted in a movie before. The producers literally saw him in an ice cream commercial and were like, "That's my James Bond." There was also a lot of media scrutiny begging for Sean Connery to come back, and that George Lazenby was nowhere near as good, and that it seemed like George Lazenby just didn't have the charm or the charisma of Sean Connery, and they are completely correct in that regard. The third and final reason as to why this 7-picture deal with George Lazenby did not happen is because his agent stupidly told him that the Bond series was going to become irrelevant in the 1970s. Look at where we are now. This franchise is 58 years old. We're getting the 25th movie this year. Whether or not Bond can survive the times now is up for debate, but he clearly survived through the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, and he clearly survived through the 2010s. So I don't know what the hell that agent was smoking. But I'm actually kind of happy because that means Lazenby only did one Bond film, and that was this one. And George Lazenby is not good as Bond. He doesn't have the charisma. He doesn't have the ruggedness of a cold-blooded killer, like how Bond's portrayed in later entries, like in the Daniel Craig entries. He just doesn't have those qualities. Doesn't strike you as somebody who would play the role of James Bond. He's also got a giant mole on his face. They literally went with that and were like, we can't touch that up in like production or anything. Like it's just gonna stay there. Yeah, Lazenby is real. I do not like his performance in this movie, and I'm always there for giving somebody the benefit of a doubt. This is the one Bond film that when I first started to try and catch up on all the Bond films I hadn't seen back when I was about like 12, 13, when Casino Royale came out, this is the one that I held off on watching last because I was like, this is the only one with George Lazenby, and I heard that he is not very good as James Bond, and this movie as a whole is just not very good either. But George Lazenby is a big reason as to why I feel that way about On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I feel he doesn't go toe-to-toe with Blofeld in this movie, who is not played by Donald Pleasence. He is played by Telly Savalas. And we gotta talk about some continuity here, because where did that facial scar go? It makes no sense. There's no continuity here. You want to keep up the same appearance, but apparently in Ian Fleming's novel, this is the first time Bond had ever met Blofeld, so they try and incorporate that into the movie by having Bond impersonate a man named Sir Hilary Bray, and he goes to the Swiss Alps, and that actor's voice is actually dubbed over George Lazenby's actual voice, because George Lazenby had so little acting experience that when he tried to impersonate that actor, he wasn't very good. That should tell you he's not a good actor. So that's an attempt to try and explain how Bond and Blofeld don't really recognize each other. But honestly, the way that they're trying to convey it in this movie, tells me that they just don't know each other because both of the characters in this movie were recast. That's really so blatantly obvious as to why they don't recognize each other, even though it's not explicitly stated or even subtly hinted at. It makes no sense. One of the weakest aspects of this film is definitely this movie's plot. This is one of my least favorite Bond plots. Blofeld wants to contaminate the world's food supply. Makes complete sense. But what does bringing beautiful women from across the world have to do with that? It's explained in the movie, but it just doesn't make any sense. And every time I watch this movie, it goes completely over my head. It's one of the most absurd, outrageous Bond films. I will give this movie credit where credit is due. They took a step back with the gadgets in the previous couple of Bond films. In the previous few Bond films, we actually saw Bond using a bit more high-tech gadgetry. They actually took a step back and wrote a movie that more closely resembled the plot of Ian Fleming's novel, to the point where almost nothing is really cut out. It's really a direct adaptation with almost everything in there, so they focused a bit more on plot in this movie. So I give them credit where credit is due, but there is a part of me that did miss that gadgetry and that lavishness that came with the previous few Bond installments. The movie just takes itself too seriously. There is no sense of fun to be had with On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And a lot of that is because of George Lazenby's performance in this movie. He is very inexperienced. George Lazenby does have some moments where he is actually trying, and he is really good, and I'll get into more of that when I talk about the final scene of the movie. But other than that, this movie takes itself way too seriously. It's got a plot that I can't resonate with. It really just doesn't make that much sense, and the way that the filmmakers and the writers and the producers and the directors try to convey that Bond and Blofeld don't know each other doesn't make sense either, especially with the continuity that Blofeld's facial scar is gone. I have no idea why. I feel like I would have liked this movie more if Sean Connery was in this one, and then he resigned after this one, and we got George Lazenby for Diamonds Are Forever, because I really hate Diamonds Are Forever. If George Lazenby was in that one, it would have been, I would have been more okay, but Sean Connery came back. I'll talk more about that in my next review, unfortunately. I've always wondered what this vision of the movie with Sean Connery would have been, because Sean Connery was actually supposed to make this movie. They were supposed to make this movie before Thunderball, before You Only Live Twice, but by the time they decided to make this movie, Sean Connery resigned from the role, so he never got to make this movie. Then he was wooed back for another one. I really wish Sean Connery had made this movie. And we gotta talk about one of my least favorite sequences in a Bond film ever, and that is the love montage. My God, there's a love montage in a Bond film. Yeah, Bond tries to woo the leader of a crime syndicate, Drago. Bond tries to woo his daughter, and he's unsuccessful at first, which makes sense because George Lazenby has no charm, charisma. You feel like there's no way you could ever believe that this guy betted anybody. Then their bond becomes mutual. I literally do not know why they decided to do a love montage. Why didn't they just make it feel more organic and more natural, like Bond and Vesper in Casino Royale? There was no love montage in Casino Royale. You actually bought the fact that there was a tangible relationship because Casino Royale attempted to make both characters, Bond and Vesper Lynd, human. You actually believed that there was chemistry between both Daniel Craig and Eva Green. There's no chemistry here between Lazenby and Diana Rigg, who, by the way, is very excellent in this movie. She's one of the better Bond girls, too, and I really always loved her interpretation of Tracy in this movie. I love how she's just like, you know what, Bond, go away. But, you know, we might actually have some mutual interest in each other, and that eventually happens, and it evolves into a relationship. I think that she's honestly the best part of this movie, and she's one of the better Bond girls. She actually has something to her as a character. She's a human being, just like I was saying with Vesper Lynd in Casino Royale. Tracy I can't say her last name at all, so I'm just gonna call her Tracy. There's actually something tangible there in the form of an actual character, but it's her chemistry with George Lazenby that doesn't really work and doesn't make this relationship viable. They also do something really stupid in the pre-title sequence, and that is Bond break the fourth wall when he fights this guy on the beach, and he just says this stupid line.
This never happened to the other fella.
Honestly, though, there are some aspects of On Her Majesty's Secret Service that I do like. I will say this movie is way too long. It's 2 hours and 22 minutes. This movie feels like an eternity. This, Honestly, the first time I watched this movie, I actually enjoyed it a lot more when I first watched it, but it has since gone down in my rankings the more and more I watch it because it's so long. It's literally 2 hours and 22 minutes, and it feels like an eternity. And again, I'm really putting a lot of this on George Lazenby. The fact that those first 5, you were so attached to Sean Connery as James Bond, and then you get George Lazenby in this movie, and he has little acting experience, he has no charisma, you can't buy him as a rugged, cold-blooded killer, he can't charm anybody, it doesn't even seem like he's even trying or that he had the right acting coach to help him get through this process. That's a huge issue that I have. This movie really relies on George Lazenby trying to carry it, and it fails. And that's why this movie honestly just feels a lot longer than it actually is. And honestly, to me, 2 hours and 22 minutes ain't that long. We're gonna talk about Bond's outfits in this movie too. They're outlandish. They're loud, they're obnoxious. Yeah, I'm calling clothes loud. I've seen so many people say that his outfits in this movie, those are not James Bond outfits, okay? I don't want to see Bond wearing that type of stuff. What on earth were half his outfits in this movie? No idea. There are some things, though, that I do appreciate and really like about On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I think it's well directed. Peter R. Hunt directed this. He was actually an editor on the previous Bond films and a second unit director on You Only Live Twice. He was promised that he was going to be able to direct a Bond film, and that ended up happening with this one. I think he does a fairly competent job. The action scenes are all in focus. He is able to give beautiful, lush cinematography. He had a clear-cut vision that he wanted to focus more on plot and character rather than the gadgetry and all the lavish action that the previous few installments have focused on. I will say that in terms of the directing, it is a fairly competently directed movie, and the action scenes in here are actually fairly entertaining. I think that there's an awesome bobsled chase, which is really interesting considering that this movie takes place in the Swiss Alps, which we got to talk about cinematography. Lots of wides, lots of beautiful, lush landscapes of those snowy Swiss Alps. I've also loved the raid at the end on Piz Gloria. The one moment I really like of George Lazenby just sliding on the ice, just killing everybody with a submachine gun. That's actually a really cool and unique idea. You also have the James Bond theme playing in that. So the directing, cinematography, some of the action scenes, I really do like. There's also a really awesome ski chase and an avalanche that I think is really entertaining and fun to watch. The end of this movie also is very tragic, and this is actually where Lazenby tries. Because of that mutual bond that Bond and Tracy supposedly have, even though it's not present in the actors, Bond and Tracy end up getting married at the end of this film, and within minutes after they get married, Blofeld and his henchwoman Irma Bunt come by in a drive-by and try to assassinate Bond. As it turns out, they kill Bond's wife. And that's honestly how the movie ends. And it's kind of this creepy, eerie ending where the credits just scroll over the windshield with the bullet in it, and you can kind of sort of see Tracy's dead body off to the side or below the dashboard. It's a very haunting final image of a Bond film. And I do think Lazenby gives an adequate performance when the cop comes by and asks Bond what's wrong. When the cop comes by and stops at Bond's car, and Bond notices him, and he's cradling a dead Tracy in his arms, and he's like,
"It's all right. It's quite all right, really. She's having a rest. We'll be going on soon." There's no hurry, you see.
I think Lazenby is actually really good in that scene. Just where was that for the rest of the movie? In all honesty, despite some issues that I've had with some previous Bond films, I really do enjoy the first 5 Bond films. But when it comes to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, if you're watching them in order, this is the first one for me where it's just like, oh, god damn, this is like a obligation to get through. That's what this movie feels like. It feels like an obligation. I like this movie. I gave it the benefit of a doubt when I first saw it back when Casino Royale came out, trying to catch up on all of the James Bond movies. But over time, it's really gone sour for me. It's the opposite effect of what You Only Live Twice was for me, where I was kind of sour on that movie, and then as time went on, became more invested in that movie and actually consider it one of the better Bond films in the series. I really don't understand why people consider this one of the better Bond films. I think it's just because of that ending. And before I actually give my grade, I just gotta say, Irma Bunt, great henchwoman, and this is the first time in a Bond film where the villain and the henchmen / henchwomen actually survived the entire movie. And I remember when I first saw this movie, I was really looking forward to what they were going to do in the next one. Because Diamonds Are Forever, for like 2 minutes, is a direct sequel to this movie, and I'll talk more about what they were going to do with Diamonds Are Forever when I talk about Diamonds Are Forever. So I was really curious to see what they were going to do with Blofeld and what they were going to do with Irma Bunt. Unfortunately, none of that ever came to fruition. Again, I'll talk about that more with Diamonds Are Forever. But I just wanted to throw that out there before I give my grade on Her Majesty's Secret Service, which I think is not a good movie at all. This is one of the more boring Bond films, in my opinion. A lot of that has to do with the fact that George Lazenby is playing James Bond. And luckily, and thank God, we only got him for one film. I really don't think I could have seen George Lazenby play Bond again after this. I'm really glad it was just this one film, one and done. That was it. I'm going to give On Her Majesty's Secret Service a C-. Not one of my favorites. I really do not understand why people love this one so much. It's bottom of the barrel Bond for me. This is literally bottom 3 for Bond. If it's not bottom 3, it's bottom 5. I don't get it. It's not a good Bond film at all. It's well directed. It's well shot. The action scenes are memorable and they're fun, and that ending scene presents a sense of tragedy for the first time in the Bond series, but the rest of the movie, I don't really like. And again, a lot of that has to do with George Lazenby. Thank you guys for watching my review of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Having a lot of fun talking about the Bond films. Not a lot of fun talking about this one, and definitely not a lot of fun talking about the next one. Oh my God. You guys are the best. I will leave my link to my website in the description below. Thank you for watching. My name is Alex Madden, and I'll see you at the movies somewhere.